The moment Joshua Harper's rental car slid off the mountain road and into a snowbank 3 miles from his cabin, he knew this weekend was going exactly as planned, which was to say, terribly. He sat there for a moment, watching the wipers struggle against the blizzard, and wondered if the universe was trying to tell him something. Maybe that a textile empire billionaire from Manhattan had no business pretending he could rough it in the Colorado Rockies, just because his therapist suggested he needed to disconnect. He grabbed his duffel bag from the trunk, checked his phone one last time, no signal, naturally, and started the trudge up the mountain road. The wind cut through his expensive wool coat like it was paper, and within minutes, he couldn't feel his face. He'd bought this cabin 6 months ago on a whim after flying over the area in his helicopter. From the air, it had looked rustic and charming. From the ground, in the middle of a snowstorm, it looked like the setting of a horror movie. By the time he reached the cabin, his fingers were so numb he could barely grip his keys. He fumbled through his pockets, then his bag, then his pockets again. Nothing. He checked every zipper, every compartment, patted down his coat 3 times. The keys weren't there. They were sitting in the cup holder of his rental car, which was currently buried in snow 3 miles down the mountain. Perfect, he muttered, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Just perfect. He tried the door anyway, knowing it was locked because he'd been paranoid about security when he wasn't here. He tried the windows. All locked. The back door, also locked. He stood on the porch, staring at his own cabin like it was a fortress designed specifically to keep him out, and felt the irony settle over him like the snow on his shoulders. The cold was starting to hurt now, that bone-deep ache that promised frostbite if he didn't find shelter soon. He looked around, squinting through the white-out conditions. There was another cabin about 200 yards to the east. He'd noticed it when he'd first bought the place but never thought much about it. Now it was his only option. The walk felt like miles. The snow was up to his knees, and every step was a battle. By the time he reached the neighbor's porch, he was shaking so hard he could barely knock. He pounded on the door with what little strength he had left, praying someone was home, praying they wouldn't take one look at him and assume he was some kind of mountain serial killer. The door opened a crack, and a woman's face appeared, backlit by warm, golden light. She had dark blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and the kind of face that would have stopped him in his tracks under normal circumstances, soft features, intelligent eyes, a dusting of freckles across her nose. Right now, though, all he could focus on was the wave of heat coming from inside. "Please," he managed through chattering teeth. "I'm locked out, my cabin, I just need to get warm." She studied him for a moment, and he could see the calculation in her eyes. Strange man, blizzard, middle of nowhere. He didn't blame her for hesitating. Then her expression shifted to something between concern and decision, and she pulled the door open wider. "Get in here before you freeze to death." He stumbled inside, and the warmth hit him like a physical force. His legs gave out, and he found himself on his knees on her doormat, dripping melting snow all over her floor. "Sorry," he mumbled. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize, just get those wet clothes off." She was already moving, grabbing blankets from somewhere, coming back with towels. "Can you stand?" He nodded and pulled himself up, his legs shaking. She guided him to a couch near a roaring fireplace, and he sank into it gratefully. She wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, then another one, then knelt down and started unlacing his boots. "I can do that," he protested weakly. "Your hands are shaking too much. Just let me help." Her voice was firm but kind, the voice of someone used to handling emergencies. She got his boots off, then his socks, and made a small, concerned sound when she saw his toes. "How long were you out there?" 20 minutes. Maybe 30. Lost track. You're lucky you found me. She disappeared again and came back with thick wool socks, which she pulled onto his feet with an efficiency that suggested she'd done this before. I'm Sophia Sinclair, by the way. Since you're dripping all over my floor, we might as well be properly introduced. Despite everything, he found himself almost smiling. Joshua Harper, thank you for not leaving me to become a popsicle. The bar for neighborliness is apparently very low. She stood up, hands on her hips, assessing him. You're going to need dry clothes. I have some things that might fit my brother Lee's stuff here. You're about his size. I don't want to impose more than I already am. You'll impose a lot more if you get hypothermia, and I have to call mountain rescue in this weather. Come on. She led him down a hallway to a small bedroom and pulled out clothes from a dresser: flannel pants, a thermal shirt, thick wool socks. She handed them to him and pointed to an adjoining bathroom. Get changed. I'll make something hot to drink. He managed to get out of his wet clothes, though his fingers still weren't working quite right. The borrowed clothes smelled like cedar and detergent, clean and comforting. When he emerged, feeling more human, he found Sophia in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. The cabin was smaller than his, but infinitely cozier. Where his place was all modern lines and expensive rustic furniture he'd hired a designer to pick out, hers was lived in and warm. Books everywhere, mismatched furniture that actually looked comfortable, artwork on the walls that seemed chosen for love rather than investment value. A potter's wheel sat in one corner near large windows, and shelves displayed various ceramic pieces: bowls, mugs, vases, all with a distinctive organic style. You're a potter, he said, stating the obvious. Ceramic artist, technically, but yes. She poured steaming liquid into 2 mugs and handed him one. Hot chocolate. Drink slowly. He wrapped his hands around the mug, grateful for the warmth, and took a tentative sip. It was real hot chocolate, made from scratch, rich and slightly bitter with a hint of cinnamon. Nothing like the packets he was used to. This is amazing. Family recipe. My grandmother was convinced that good hot chocolate could solve most of life's problems. Sophia settled into an armchair across from him, curling her legs under her. So, Joshua Harper, what brings a guy to the middle of nowhere in the worst snowstorm we've had all season? Bad decision-making skills, apparently. He took another sip, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. I bought the cabin next door 6 months ago. This is only my 2nd time here. Ah, you're the mysterious neighbor. The locals have been speculating. Speculating what? Everything from tech mogul to mafia boss to witness protection. She smiled over the rim of her mug. Small mountain communities don't have much else to do but gossip. Which one were you betting on? None of the above. You don't have the paranoia of witness protection, and mafia bosses travel with more entourage. Tech mogul was possible, but your coat is too expensive. I was leaning toward finance or old money. He raised an eyebrow. You got all that from my coat? I got that from the way you apologized for dripping on my floor when you were literally dying of hypothermia. That's old school manners, not new money arrogance. She tilted her head, studying him with those intelligent eyes. So, which is it? Textiles, actually. My family's company. I run it now. Textiles. She looked surprised. That's refreshingly unsexy, he laughed, actually laughed, which startled him. He couldn't remember the last time someone had called his billion-dollar empire unsexy. We prefer to call it classic. How very diplomatic. She set down her mug. So the textile baron buys a cabin in the mountains. Let me guess, needed to get away from it all, reconnect with nature, find yourself. My therapist's words exactly. And how's that working out for you? He gestured at himself, wearing borrowed clothes in a stranger's cabin. About as well as you'd expect, She laughed, a genuine sound that lit up her whole face. Well, at least you can't say it's not an adventure. Outside, the wind howled and the windows rattled. Joshua glanced toward them, frowning. How long do these storms usually last? Could be hours, could be days. This one looks pretty serious. Sophia stood and walked to the window, peering out. Can't see more than a few feet. You're definitely not getting back to your cabin tonight, even if you had keys. I don't suppose you're secretly a locksmith. Sadly, no. I can throw a decent pot and make a mean hot chocolate, but breaking and entering isn't in my skill set. She turned back to him. You're welcome to stay here until the storm passes. I have a guest room. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering. What kind of person would I be if I kicked you out in a blizzard? She moved to the kitchen and started pulling things from the refrigerator. Besides, I was going to make dinner anyway. Might as well make enough for two. At least let me help. You can barely hold your mug steady. Sit there, drink your hot chocolate, and try not to get frostbite. But she said it with a smile that took any sting out of the words. He watched her move around the kitchen with easy confidence, chopping vegetables, putting water on to boil, moving like someone who actually lived in their space rather than just occupied it. She was wearing leggings and an oversized sweater that kept sliding off one shoulder, thick wool socks on her feet. Her hair had started to escape its ponytail, curling around her face in the humidity from the stove. How long have you lived here? He asked. 5 years full-time. I inherited the cabin from my grandfather about 7 years ago, spent 2 years renovating it, then decided to make the permanent move from Denver. You gave up Denver for this. She looked at him over her shoulder, one eyebrow raised. Says the man who bought a cabin here to escape from wherever you came from. New York, Manhattan. And you're running away to the mountains on your therapist's orders. Glass houses, Joshua. He conceded the point with a nod. Fair enough. What made you decide to move here permanently? She was quiet for a moment, focused on stirring something in a pot. When she spoke, her voice was softer. I was working as a marketing executive in Denver. Good job, good salary, climbing the corporate ladder. Then my grandfather died and I came here to deal with the cabin and I just didn't want to leave. I realized I'd been living someone else's idea of success, doing what I was supposed to do rather than what I wanted to do. So you became a ceramic artist. So I became a ceramic artist. I make enough to live on, I love what I do, and I wake up every morning to this. She gestured at the windows, where even through the storm, the mountain landscape was visible. It's a good life. There was something in her voice, a contentment that Joshua recognized as foreign to his own experience. He ran a company worth billions, had homes in 3 countries, could buy basically anything he wanted. But he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt that bone-deep satisfaction she seemed to carry with her. You must think I'm ridiculous, he said. Buying a cabin I don't use, flying in for weekends I don't take. I think you're human. She started plating food, pasta with vegetables and what smelled like homemade sauce. We all get lost sometimes. At least you're trying to find your way back. She brought the plates over, and they ate at her small kitchen table. The food was simple but good, the kind of meal someone makes when they actually care about what they're eating. They talked while they ate, easy conversation that flowed naturally. She told him about her work, about the gallery in town that sold her pieces, about learning to live with the isolation and the harsh winters. He found himself talking about things he rarely discussed: the pressure of running a family business, the weight of expectations, the loneliness of always being the one in charge. You have any siblings? She asked. A sister. She's a doctor in Boston. Smart enough to get out of the family business. Are you too close? We are. It's complicated. He pushed pasta around his plate. She thinks I work too much. She's not wrong. Let me guess you think she doesn't understand the pressure you're under. Are you a mind reader along with being a potter? I'm an observer of human nature. It's part of the job, she smiled. For what it's worth, you both can be right. You probably do work too much, and she probably doesn't fully understand your pressure. That's the thing about family. We love each other and drive each other crazy in equal measure. What about your family? Parents in Arizona, soaking up retirement sun. 2 brothers, one in Seattle, one in Chicago. We talk every week, visit a few times a year. They think I'm crazy for living up here alone, but they respect it. She stood and started clearing plates. You want coffee? I have a feeling we're going to be up for a while. The storm's getting worse. He helped her clean up despite her protests, and they settled back in the living room with coffee, the fire crackling, the storm raging outside. It felt surreal, this cozy domestic scene with a woman he'd met hours ago. In his normal life, he was always on guard, always aware of who wanted something from him. Here, wearing borrowed clothes in a cabin in the mountains, he felt the armor slip away. Can I ask you something? Sophia was curled up in her armchair again, hands wrapped around her mug. What are you really running from? The question was direct but not unkind. He took a moment to consider it, to give her the honesty she deserved. Myself, mostly. The person I've become. I took over the company when my father died 8 years ago. I was 28, determined to prove I could do it, that I wasn't just some spoiled rich kid playing at business. And I did prove it. Grew the company by 200%, expanded into new markets, made more money than I know what to do with. He stared into the fire. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be anything else. The company became everything. I can't remember the last time I had a conversation that wasn't about work. Can't remember the last time I did something just because I wanted to. Hence the cabin, which I've been too busy to visit, which is its own kind of pathetic. Not pathetic, human. She set down her coffee and leaned forward, elbows on her knees. You know what I think? I think you're standing at a crossroads and you're terrified of choosing wrong. So you bought the cabin as a gesture toward change without actually committing to it. He looked at her, startled by her perception. You got all that from a few hours of conversation. I told you I'm an observer. Plus, I've been where you are. Different circumstances, but the same fear. The fear that if you change, you'll lose something essential about yourself. Or that you'll discover there's nothing underneath the role you've been playing. How did you get past it? I jumped. Quit my job, moved here, started over. It was terrifying and probably stupid and the best thing I've ever done. She smiled, but there was understanding in her eyes. But that was my path. Yours might look different. Not everyone has to run away to the mountains and become a ceramic artist. Even though that worked out so well for you, maybe you just need to remember who Joshua Harper is when he's not being the CEO. What did you like to do before the company took over your life? The question stumped him. He sat there, trying to remember, and came up mostly blank. I don't know, that's the problem. Okay, different question. What have you enjoyed about today? And you can't say the hypothermia part. He found himself smiling. Talking to you, being in this cabin, the fact that nothing here is about money or business or expectations. You have no idea who I am or what I'm worth, and you let me in anyway because it was the right thing to do. For the record, I do know what you're worth now. You told me you run a textile empire and grew it by 200%. I can do math. She grinned. But I get your point. Up here, none of that matters. You're just a guy who got locked out in a snowstorm. Just a guy who got lucky that his neighbor was home. Lucky and slightly stupid for coming up here alone in winter without checking the weather. I checked the weather. It said light snow. Mountain weather lies. She stood and walked to the window again. Speaking of which, I think we're stuck for the night. The snow's at least 3 feet deep now, and the wind's not letting up. Joshua joined her at the window. She was right. The world outside had become a wall of white, the wind driving the snow sideways. He couldn't even see his own cabin from here. "I'm sorry to impose," he said. "Stop apologizing. I offered, remember." She turned to him, and in the lamplight her face was soft and open. "Besides, it's nice having company. I love living alone, but winter can get isolating. Human contact is good for the soul. Even when the human is a workaholic billionaire who doesn't know how to relax, especially then. You're like a rehabilitation project. By the time this storm ends, I'll have you meditating and making pottery." "I don't think I'm the pottery type." "Everyone's the pottery type. They just don't know it yet." She moved toward the hallway. "Come on, let me show you the guest room. You look exhausted." He was exhausted. The near hypothermia, the warmth, the food, and the surprisingly deep conversation had drained him. He followed her down the hall to a small room with a comfortable-looking bed and more of those handmade quilts. Bathrooms across the hall. "There are extra towels if you want a shower. I'll find you a toothbrush." She paused in the doorway. "And Joshua? Try not to spend the whole night worrying about work or productivity or whatever it is that keeps you up at night. You're stranded in a blizzard. There's literally nothing you can do except rest. Give yourself permission." She left before he could respond, and he sat on the bed, turning her words over in his mind. Give yourself permission. When was the last time he'd done that? When was the last time he'd allowed himself to just be, without the constant mental checklist of things to do, people to manage, problems to solve? He showered, brushed his teeth with the toothbrush she'd left on the bathroom counter, and climbed into bed. The sheets smelled like lavender, and through the window he could hear the storm still raging. He expected to lie awake, his mind spinning with work problems and the inconvenience of being stranded. Instead, he fell asleep almost immediately, deeper than he had in years. He woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment he was disoriented, unsure where he was. Then he remembered. The storm, the lockout, Sophia. He checked his watch, 8:30. He couldn't remember the last time he'd slept past 6. He found her in the kitchen, cooking breakfast, her hair still damp from her own shower. She'd changed into jeans and a thermal shirt, feet still bare despite the cold. "Good morning," she said, smiling at him. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in months, actually." He accepted the coffee she handed him. "Is the storm over, finally?" "Stopped about an hour ago. Come look." He followed her to the window, and his breath caught. The world had been transformed. Everything was covered in pristine white, the sun glinting off the snow like diamonds. The trees were heavy with it, the sky a brilliant blue. It was beautiful and completely impassable. "We're snowed in," Sophia said cheerfully. "Roads won't be clear until tomorrow at the earliest, maybe longer. Hope you didn't have anywhere urgent to be." He pulled out his phone, still no signal, and felt a weird sense of relief. "No signal anyway. I couldn't get to work if I tried." "Perfect. Then you can help me dig out the porch and maybe build a snowman." "A snowman? When's the last time you built a snowman?" He had to think about it. "I was probably 10. Then you're overdue." She plated eggs and bacon, toast and hash browns. "But first, breakfast. Can't build a proper snowman on an empty stomach." They ate, and then she bundled him into his now dry coat and found him boots and gloves. They spent the morning shoveling snow, clearing paths, and yes, building a snowman. It was ridiculous and childish and more fun than Joshua had had in years. Sophia was bossy about snowman construction, insisting on proper proportions and refusing to settle for anything less than perfection. "He needs a carrot nose," she declared. "We don't have a carrot. Check the vegetable drawer. There's always a carrot." There was indeed a carrot, and they gave their snowman a dignified nose along with stick arms and stone eyes. They stepped back to admire their work, and Joshua felt something in his chest loosen, some tight knot he hadn't known was there. "Not bad for a corporate tycoon," Sophia said, bumping his shoulder with hers. "I had a good teacher." They went back inside, cold and wet and laughing, and made more hot chocolate. The afternoon passed in easy companionship. Sophia worked at her pottery wheel while Joshua watched, fascinated by the way her hands shaped clay into form. She tried to teach him, but he was hopeless at it, producing lopsided bowls that made her laugh. "It's harder than it looks," he protested. "It's all about feeling the clay, letting it guide you. You're trying to force it into shape. That's not how it works. I'm used to being in control." "I know, that's your problem." But she said it gently, standing behind him to guide his hands on the wheel. "Feel it. Listen to what it wants to be." He tried, really tried, and maybe produced something slightly less lopsided. Sophia declared it a triumph and set it aside to dry. They made dinner together, more pasta and a salad from ingredients she had on hand. They ate by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about growing up in Colorado, about learning pottery from a local artist, about the quiet satisfaction of creating something with her hands. He told her about business school, about the pressure of living up to his father's legacy, about the sister he missed and didn't call enough. "You should call her," Sophia said. "When you get signal again. Life's too short to let distance grow just because we're busy." "You're very wise for someone who makes bowls for a living. Hey, respect the bowls. The bowls are art." She threw a napkin at him and he caught it, grinning. As the evening wore on, Joshua realized he didn't want the storm to end. Didn't want to go back to his cabin, back to his life, back to being the CEO of Harper Textiles. Here, in this small cabin with this woman who made pottery and spoke her mind and saw through his bullshit, he felt more himself than he had in years. "Can I ask you something?" he said during a lull in conversation. "Shoot. Do you ever get lonely up here? Really lonely?" She considered the question, staring into the fire. "Sometimes, especially in winter when I go days without seeing another person. But there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I learned that when I moved here. In Denver, I was surrounded by people and lonely as hell. Here, I'm alone a lot, but I'm not lonely. I have myself, my work, my thoughts. I have friends in town, people I care about. It's enough. I'm surrounded by people constantly and lonely as hell. I know." She looked at him and her eyes were kind. "I could tell the moment you walked in my door. Well, stumbled. You have that look." "What look?" "Like you're searching for something you can't name. Like you're desperate for connection but don't know how to reach for it anymore." He felt exposed, seen in a way that was uncomfortable and oddly comforting at the same time. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's been there. She shifted on the couch, drawing her knees up. "The thing about being lonely is that it becomes a habit. You get so used to not connecting, not being vulnerable, that eventually you forget how. You build walls and call it professionalism. You keep people at arm's length and call it boundaries. But really, you're just scared. Scared of what? Of being seen. Of letting someone in and having them realize you're not the polished, perfect version you present to the world. Of being human and messy and uncertain. You sound like my therapist." "Your therapist is probably right," she smiled. "The good news is walls can come down, habits can be broken. You just have to be willing to try. And if I don't know how, then you start small. You call your sister. You actually take time off to use this cabin you bought. You let yourself build a snowman without worrying about productivity." She reached over and squeezed his hand, a quick, warm gesture. You let yourself be stranded in a blizzard with a strange woman and don't spend the whole time thinking about work. I haven't thought about work once today. That might be a record. See, progress. She stood, stretching. It's late. We should probably get some sleep. Tomorrow the plows might actually make it through, and you'll have to face the reality of being locked out of your own cabin. Right, that. He'd actually forgotten about the keys, about his car buried in snow miles down the mountain. I should probably call someone about that. Tomorrow. Tonight, just sleep. He did sleep, even better than the night before, and when he woke the next morning it was to the sound of machinery, the road crews, finally making their way through. Sophia was already up, coffee made, looking out the window at the plows. "They're here," she said when he emerged. "Give them a few hours and the roads should be passable. You can call someone about your car and your keys." Right. He should have been relieved. Instead, he felt an odd sense of loss. "Thank you for everything. You saved my life. I gave you hot chocolate and a place to sleep. Let's not be dramatic." But she was smiling. "Sophia, I mean it, these 2 days, they've been important. You've been important." She looked at him for a long moment and he saw something shift in her expression. "Yeah. They have been, haven't they?" The day passed in preparations for departure. The roads opened. Joshua called a towing company for his car, a locksmith for his cabin. He could have left that afternoon, but somehow they both found reasons for him to stay one more night, one more dinner, one more conversation by the fire. "I don't want to go back," he admitted as they sat in the gathering darkness, the fire crackling between them. "I know. I feel like I'm going to lose something when I leave here, something I've just found." "Then don't lose it." She shifted closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her. "Joshua, you came up here looking for something. I think maybe you found it. Not in your cabin, not in the isolation, but in remembering how to be present, how to connect, how to let someone see you. Is that what we've done? Connected, haven't we?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something slot into place in his chest. "Yes, we have. So don't lose it when you go back. Hold on to it. Call me. Visit. Let this be the start of something instead of a strange blip in your otherwise scheduled life." What if I want it to be more than that? The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Sophia's eyes widened slightly, and he saw hope flicker across her face before she guarded it. "More how? I don't know exactly. I just know that I haven't felt this comfortable with another person in years, maybe ever. I know that you see me, the real me, and you don't want anything from me except honesty. I know that leaving tomorrow feels wrong in a way I can't explain. Joshua, you live in Manhattan. I live on a mountain. Your life is board meetings and business deals. Mine is pottery and peace and quiet. How would that even work? I don't know. But I want to figure it out if you want to." She was quiet for a long moment, and he held his breath, aware that he was on a precipice. Then she smiled, tentative but real. "I want to. God help me, I want to." He reached for her hand and she laced her fingers through his. They sat like that for a while, watching the fire, neither of them speaking. It felt like a beginning. The locksmith came the next morning and Joshua finally got into his own cabin. It was cold and sterile and everything he'd been trying to escape. He packed up his things, but instead of driving straight back to town and catching a flight home, he went back to Sophia's cabin. "I have to go back to New York," he said when she opened the door. "But I'm coming back in 2 weeks, for a whole week. No work, no distractions, just me trying to figure out what I want my life to look like. A whole week. That's ambitious for you." "Someone very wise told me I need to start making changes." "Start small," she said. He stepped closer. "In 2 weeks will you have dinner with me? Proper dinner in town, like a date. Joshua Harper, are you asking me on a date?" "I'm asking you for a chance to see if this thing between us is real, if it can survive outside the bubble of a snowstorm." She looked up at him, and he saw her own hope reflected back. "Yes, 2 weeks. Come back and we'll figure it out." He kissed her then, soft and careful, a question and a promise all at once. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to his chest, and it felt like coming home. The 2 weeks back in New York were the longest of Joshua's life. He threw himself into reorganizing his schedule, delegating responsibilities he'd been clutching too tightly. He called his sister, and they talked for 2 hours, really talked, in a way they hadn't since before their father died. He told her about Sophia, about the cabin, about wanting to change his life. "I'm proud of you," his sister said. "I've been waiting years for you to wake up. Better late than never, much better." He counted down the days until he could go back. When he finally drove up the mountain again, this time with proper weather checks and spare keys, his heart was pounding. What if it had just been the storm? What if the connection didn't survive in the real world? But then Sophia opened her door and she was smiling, and he knew it was real. They went to dinner in town, a small restaurant with good food and better company. They talked for hours, picking up threads from their conversations during the storm and spinning them out into something deeper. She told him about a new series of pieces she was working on. He told her about the changes he was making at work, about learning to trust his team, about carving out time for a life outside the office. Over the next 6 months, they figured out how to make it work. Joshua started spending more time in Colorado, working remotely when he could, flying back to New York when he had to. Sophia visited him in the city twice, wide-eyed at his penthouse and unimpressed by his wealth in a way that made him love her more. They video called when they were apart, long, rambling conversations that felt as intimate as being in the same room. He met her family when they visited for Christmas. Her parents loved him, her brothers grilled him about his intentions, and he passed whatever test they'd set. She met his sister in Boston, and they bonded over their shared exasperation at his workaholic tendencies. His sister pulled him aside before they left and said, "Don't screw this up. She's perfect for you. I know. Then do something about it." He did. In the spring, exactly 1 year after the snowstorm that changed everything, he brought Sophia back to her cabin. They spent the day hiking, enjoying the mountain air and the wildflowers starting to bloom. At sunset, he led her to the spot where they'd built their snowman months ago. "This seems familiar," she said, looking around. "It's where I started figuring out what I wanted, who I wanted to be." He took her hands. "I wanted to ask you here." "Ask me what?" He got down on one knee and her eyes went wide. "Sophia Sinclair, you opened your door to a stranger in a snowstorm and changed my entire life. You saw past the billionaire and the CEO to the man underneath. You taught me how to be present, how to connect, how to build a life that actually means something. You made me want to be better. I love you. Will you marry me?" She was crying, laughing, nodding all at once. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes." The ring was simple because he knew her taste by now, a single diamond, elegant and understated. She held out her hand and he slipped it on, and then she was pulling him up and kissing him, and he felt like the luckiest man alive. They got married in the fall, a small ceremony on the mountain with close friends and family. Sophia wore a simple dress and wildflowers in her hair. Joshua cried during his vows, not caring who saw. Her grandfather's cabin became theirs, and Joshua's cabin next door became his office and studio, a place where he could work remotely and still be close to home. The restructuring at Harper Textiles continued. Joshua promoted a COO he trusted and stepped back from day-to-day operations, focusing instead on vision and strategy. He worked 3 days a week, 4 at most. The company thrived under the new structure, and Joshua finally admitted that maybe, possibly, He didn't have to control everything personally for it to succeed. Sophia's career flourished too. She started getting recognition beyond the local gallery, her pieces featured in shows across the country. Joshua loved watching her work, loved the way her face looked when she was lost in creation. He started learning pottery in earnest, terrible at it still, but she said his lopsided bowls had character. They built a life together that balanced his world and hers. Winters on the mountain, some time in New York when needed, always coming back to each other. They adopted a dog, a mountain mutt from the local shelter who loved snow as much as they did. They hosted Sophia's family for holidays and had his sister visit regularly. They had friends over for dinners, took hikes in summer and skied in winter, and sometimes stayed in for days, just the two of them, talking and laughing and being together. 2 years after they married, Sophia woke him up early one morning, her eyes bright with tears and joy. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. He pulled her close, overwhelmed with gratitude and love and a future he'd never imagined for himself. "Really, really. Due in January, a winter baby. They'll love the snow or hate it and rebel by moving to the tropics. Either way, they'll be ours." Their daughter, Julia Sarah Harper, was born on a snowy January morning, the mountains white and beautiful outside the hospital windows. She had Sophia's eyes and what Joshua's sister swore was his stubborn chin. They brought her home to the cabin, to the life they'd built, and Joshua held her by the window, showing her the mountains that had saved him. "This is where I met your mother," he told her, even though she was too young to understand. "This is where I learned what matters. This is where everything changed." Sophia came to stand beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "No regrets about the billionaire lifestyle, the penthouse and the private jets." "I have the penthouse and the private jets. I just also have this. Have you, have her." He kissed the top of Julia's head. "Have everything that actually matters, still making changes, still figuring out who Joshua Harper is when he's not being the CEO, every day. Turns out he's a husband, a father, a man who makes terrible pottery but keeps trying. A man who got locked out in a snowstorm and found everything he'd been missing. And what about the woman who opened her door?" He turned to her, pulling her close with his free arm, their daughter between them. "She got exactly what she deserved, a man who loves her more than anything, who will spend the rest of his life being grateful she took a chance on a frozen stranger. Pretty good deal for both of us then. The best." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and gentle, covering the mountain in white. Inside, the fire crackled, the dog snored by the hearth, and the small family stood together in the warmth and the light. Joshua thought about the man he'd been, driving up the mountain alone, locked out and freezing, desperate for change but not knowing how to find it. He'd been looking for himself in isolation, in running away. What he'd found instead was connection. Love. A partner who saw him completely and loved him anyway. A life that balanced ambition with presence, success with meaning. The cabin next door, his cabin, stood empty most of the time now. He'd turned it into a guest house for visitors, but mostly it was just there, a reminder of where he'd been heading before the storm changed everything. Before Sophia opened her door and changed the trajectory of his entire life. Sometimes he wondered what would have happened if she hadn't been home that night. If she'd been in town, or traveling, or had decided not to answer the door to a stranger in a blizzard. He'd have died, probably, frozen on her porch or trying to make it back down the mountain. At the very least, he'd have remained the man he'd been: successful, wealthy, lonely, slowly burning out without even realizing it. But she had been home. She had opened the door. And everything that came after the connection, the love, the life they'd built together stemmed from that one moment of kindness, that decision to help a stranger in need. "What are you thinking about?" Sophia asked, swaying gently with Julia in his arms. How lucky I am. How different everything could have been. Luck had something to do with it, but so did choice. You chose to come up here, chose to knock on my door, chose to stay to come back to build something with me. That wasn't luck, that was courage. You're giving me too much credit. I was desperate and freezing. And you could have gone back to New York and never returned, could have written it off as a weird experience and gone back to your old life. But you didn't. You chose different. She was right. The storm had brought them together, but everything after had been choice. His choice to return. Her choice to take a chance on him. Their mutual choice to figure out how to build a life that bridged their two worlds. His choice to restructure his work, to prioritize differently, to become the kind of man who deserved her. Her choice to trust him, to believe in him, to love him even when it would have been easier not to. Julia made a small sound and Sophia reached for her. Someone's hungry. I'll feed her, you get started on breakfast. Deal. He watched her settle into the rocking chair by the window, their daughter cradled against her, and felt his heart expand with love. This was what he'd been missing, not the quiet or the mountains or the escape from work. This connection, this intimacy, this building of a life with another person. The work-life balance everyone talked about wasn't really about hours in the office versus hours at home. It was about being present, about knowing what mattered and choosing it again and again. He made breakfast pancakes because Sophia loved them and he'd gotten good at making them. He brought her coffee, made just the way she liked it. He cleaned up while she put Julia down for a nap. They ate together in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when two people are completely at ease with each other. I have that show in Denver next month, Sophia said. Will you be able to come? Already blocked off the dates. Wouldn't miss it. You don't have to come to everything, you know. I know you're busy. I'm never too busy for you. That's the whole point of the changes I made, so I could be there for the things that matter. She smiled at him over her coffee. I love you. I love you too. It was that simple and that profound. They'd built a life on that foundation: love, yes, but also respect, communication, the willingness to bridge their differences and choose each other every day. It wasn't always easy. There were hard days, arguments about schedules and priorities, the normal friction of two people learning to share a life. But underneath it all was that core of love and commitment, the knowledge that they were better together than apart. The years rolled on. Julia grew, wild and happy, a mountain kid with her mother's creativity and her father's determination. They had a son 2 years later, Marcus, who was quieter but just as loved. The cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family, but they kept the heart of it the same: warm, welcoming, filled with love and laughter. Joshua continued to run Harper Textiles, but from a different stance. He was a leader, not a martyr to the company. He took vacations. He made it to school plays and soccer games. He taught his children to ski and build snowmen and appreciate the mountains that had changed his life. Sophia's career continued to flourish, her pieces in galleries across the country, her name becoming known in the ceramic art world. But always, they came back to the mountain, to the cabin where it all started, to the place where a man locked out in a snowstorm found more than shelter. On their 10th anniversary, they recreated that first night. Sophia made hot chocolate from her grandmother's recipe. They sat by the fire and talked for hours, remembering. Joshua looked at her older now, laugh lines around her eyes, her hair starting to show threads of gray, and loved her more than he had on that first night, more than he had on their wedding day, more with each passing year. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Taking in that frozen stranger. Every day, she deadpanned, then laughed at his expression. No, you idiot, never, not once. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though I'm still terrible at pottery, even though some things never change. Some things do, though. I'm not the man I was when I knocked on your door. No, you're not. You're better. You're the man you were always meant to be. You just needed to find your way there. I needed you to show me the way. We showed each other. That's how it works. She leaned against him and he wrapped his arm around her. Partnership. Love. Choosing each other every day. Outside, snow began to fall. It was winter again, full circle from where they'd started. But they weren't the same people they'd been that night. They'd grown, changed, built a life and a family. They'd learned that happiness wasn't something you found in isolation or escape, but something you built with another person, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. The fire crackled. The house was quiet, the kids asleep upstairs, the dog sprawled at their feet. Joshua held his wife and felt that same sense of peace he'd felt on that first morning, waking up in her guest room after the best sleep of his life. The feeling that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what? For opening your door, for taking a chance, for changing my life. Thank you for knocking, for staying, for choosing this life with me." They sat in the firelight, two people who'd found each other in the middle of a storm and built something beautiful in its aftermath. The snow fell outside, covering the mountain in white, but inside was warmth and love and the life they'd chosen together. It had started with a locked door and a desperate knock. It had grown into everything that mattered. And as Joshua sat there with Sophia in his arms, the fire warming them both, he knew that getting locked out in that snowstorm was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He'd been looking for an escape, a reset, a way to find himself. What he'd found was so much more. He'd found home. He'd found love. He'd found the person who made him want to be better, do better, live better. He'd found Sophia. And she'd found him too, a frozen stranger on her doorstep who became her husband, her partner, the father of her children, the love of her life. The storm had brought them together. Their choices had kept them together. And love, that stubborn, beautiful, powerful thing, had built them a life worth living. Outside the snow continued to fall, and inside the fire burned on. And Joshua Harper, billionaire, CEO, husband, father, man who'd finally found his way home, held his wife close and smiled into the winter night.